a hub for local news and information. We have a great show for you today. Very excited. Well, if you've been watching this program, you might recall Mitch Kaplan was in with us last week, and we talked about some of the projects that his film company is now working on, and one of those involves a book by a local with a funny accent, because I don't know that local, that accent's quite local, Nicholas Griffin, whose book, The Year of Dangerous Days, Riots, Refugees, and Cocaine in Miami, 1980, is a captivating read and is being developed into a series, correct, Nicholas? A series we're talking about here.
That's right. TV series.
TV series, which I just got started with reading the book. It is captivating. I was up too late. That's why I came in late today. That's why this show, you are responsible for this show starting late today.
That's what I like to hear.
That's what you like to hear. Yeah. Well, let's talk a couple things in the news, and then we're going to get right into the book. We're going to get right into, what motivated you and sort of the inspiration to the book and what's the future for it, because it really is an incredible story that some of us that are old enough lived through 1980 in Miami, Florida. But a couple items in the news. While the impeachment continues on the Senate floors, yesterday only 5 Republican senators agreed to continue with the Trump impeachment trial. Romney, Sass, Collins, Murkowski, and Toomey are the 5 brave U.S. senators that agreed to move it on. The argument of the 45 others: can't have an impeachment when the president is not in office. Well, that's kind of an odd argument to me, because here we are with a president that, we all know an impeachment takes weeks, sometimes months to occur. So in essence, what you're saying is, well, if you're a U.S. president and you lose an election in November, you can pretty much do whatever you want till Inauguration Day. Even try to overthrow our government by inciting a riot. That's what that means to me. Horrible argument. What do you think, Nicholas?
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think otherwise it's carte blanche for whoever wants to do whatever in the lame duck session.
Yeah, and I think it's just a weak argument. Really happy to hear and see that the iconic Art Deco Walgreens in downtown Miami will be preserved, will not be knocked down, and it's going to become, it looks like, a speakeasy. Stamble, the developer, has submitted plans to redevelop the legendary Miami site that will be renamed Julia and Henry's Eatery and Drinks. The 5-story architectural gem was purchased by the developer for $19.5 million and will be restored as a 5-story speakeasy and offices. And that's great. Bal Harbour voters said no to a taller Bal Harbour shops as the item was overwhelmingly defeated. 90% of the voters said no to more density and to a higher Bal Harbour shops. Now, any proposed development exceeding height would require approval from voters prior to going to the city's 5-member council. The people in that community are taking control of what is being developed in the city of Bal Harbour. And lastly, Miami-Dade County settles a lawsuit with the Florida Marlins. That killed me. The Florida Marlins were sold for $1.2 billion. Let's see, what year was that? About 8 years. I think it was 8 years ago. $1.2 billion. And it was all off the back of us, the taxpayers, who paid for that beautiful new stadium. I love the stadium. I have no complaints about that. But the city was supposed to get a portion of the proceeds, a portion of the profits. And Jeffrey Luria, that scoundrel of a human being, said, oh, no, $1.2 billion, there's no profits. And somehow Jeter and the new ownership group got dragged into that argument. Not sure how, but they have settled. Apparently $4.2 million will go to the county, and then their portion being distributed to the city of Miami. That's it.
$4.2 million, that's all we got. Out of $1 billion.
I thought it was a little low myself. Yeah. I'm not sure how much. I know that Luria got the Marlins was able to come in and take over the Marlins when he, totally destroyed the Montreal Expos. So we said, welcome, you destroyed the Expos, come to Miami now. Glad he's gone. I'm happy we have a new ownership group, and at least the county and henceforth the city of Miami will get a few dollars on that deal. So
what are we going to do with the $4 million? We're just going to buy like a 1-bedroom in Brickell?
Yeah, exactly. Before we start talking about the book, you brought it up. You're a troublemaker. I can tell you're a troublemaker already. You brought it up. 4.2 million. Yeah, it'll buy a 1-bedroom on Brickell. And all this talk, you see it at the state level. We see it with Mayor Suarez in the city of Miami. They're urging these tech companies to come to South Florida. And, I'm all for us growing, but let's do it in a smart way. We have a group of people, large group of people making $40, $35, $40, $50, $60,000 a year in South Florida that can't afford to live here. They can't afford to buy housing. And, we're welcoming all these people. You hear it at the state level. You hear it in the city of Miami. Come to South Florida. Come to Florida. This is where you as a tech company should be. What about the people that live here now? What about those people? What are they going to do?
Yeah, it's tough. The same, I feel somewhat from the other side as well. If you can grab these amazing businesses that do want to leave places like California and New York, then we can have a lot of expanded business taxation, more money in the bank. That's great. But, obviously they're going to come with pretty heavy workforces. Where are they going to go? Who are they going to push out? How can we take care of both ends of this and really have it a win-win? And, I'd also love to see how many people still want to move to Florida if this wasn't happening right now, if this was happening, for instance, during September or October towards the end of the hurricane season. Yeah. How many of those guys are looking around and going, maybe Miami's not the best idea?
Maybe not. You mentioned something you saw online before the program about moving something to South Florida or to the state of Florida.
Yeah, this was my favorite news item from yesterday. This was the chief financial officer of the state of Florida who wrote a letter to the International Olympic Committee. Apparently there's murmurings that Tokyo doesn't want the Olympics anymore this year. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. But he was offering Florida as a last-minute replacement. What a great idea to move an enormous project like the Olympics to Florida at the height of the hurricane season.
Yeah, let's just take the Olympics here. I mean, what if there's COVID? So what if it's the height of the
of all the wind-assisted world records we could break during, you could do the 100 meters in under a second on the right day. And
yeah, man, you get that wind behind you, or it could be the polar opposite. If that wind's in your face, you are screwed, my friend. You are screwed. We'll see, 12-second times in the 100 meters. That wouldn't be too good. But Nicholas, it's so great to have you back. And when I say back, you were with me on the radio show, and I really did enjoy the time we spent together on the radio. You're a fascinating guy, and the book, and I'll hold it up again, The Year of Dangerous Days, 1980 in Miami, was something that certainly was a dangerous time. And finding out with my interview with Mitchell Kaplan that his company has optioned your book, and they have been really peddling it to, I guess, is it Netflix for a series, or how's that working? What's exactly going on there?
Well, Mitch is, he teams up with an outfit out of Hollywood who's sort of the big producer and the money men, and then they've put together a team, including the showrunner and a group of writers, and then together they start writing the pilot script and sort of the arc of what 10 episodes might look like. And then when that's all done, then everyone goes out to, the Netflix
shopping around
and the HBOs. So we're in really, really good hands. Things are moving very quickly. So far, it's 10 out of 10, but it's always a risk, always a gamble.
Well, I want, before I ask you some, and I've got a million questions in my mind about the book, about the process, it's a great sort of, talking to Mitchell last week, it's a great sort of team he's put together, because Mitchell's the kind of guy that can read. He reads, obviously books and reads voraciously. he's the kind of guy that could probably read something and go, now that will make a movie, right?
Yeah. Well, I think Mitch is also, as he told me, that for decades he's been looking for what he thought would be sort of a great Miami book that might make a great Miami TV show. So, he jumped on it because he thought it fit the criteria. I hope he's right. We'll see.
Yeah. What is it like, before we talk about just the content of the book, what is it like? You just mentioned a second ago. So you have a team of writers that are taking this book and putting together 10 episodes, right? What is that like as a writer, having someone, it's your baby, right?
Yeah.
So you put it in the hands of someone else. Does it make you cringe a little? Does it make you scared? How does that make you feel?
At first, it feels like someone's walking on your grave. But, no, I'll tell you what, this has been highly collaborative. It's actually been a lot of fun for me. Yes, you are entrusting other people, but the way the showrunner works is he gives these writers that he hires an incredible amount of freedom. He basically gives them the book, says, pick a couple of characters who intrigue you from the book and run with those characters. And that's what everyone did. And then I would get the phone calls of, okay, I'm picking A or B. Is there stuff that didn't make the book? And in this case, there was an enormous amount of stuff that didn't make the book. So I have reams of research on all these guys, which I could give the individual writers. And then it makes it a lot easier there and sort of creating these sort of more three-dimensional characters.
Is it important for you as the writer to have the series really reflect the book? Because a lot of times you see a movie or a series off a book and you go, well, that's not even close.
Yeah, I kind of feel, I also have the other problem where you watch a film or a television series that's so faithful that it seems almost lifeless.
Right.
So hopefully we'll end up somewhere in the middle. I think you should be free to riff off the truth. You're not, I think it's, a TV show doesn't have to be, it will be a dramatized version of the truth rather than the truth itself. And I think as long as everyone knows that, then you got a lot more freedom. I think you don't want to keep the same character names if you're going to suddenly turn a honest police officer into a crooked police officer, things like that. But there are ways to do this. But in the end, you want something that people are going to watch.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that truth that you just mentioned. And so 1980 in Miami, from my perspective, I left and went away to college in 1979.
Good timing.
Great timing. I mean, I guess good for my parents. I was born when I was born, but I went away to college in 1979 and Miami was a really weird place in 1980. Expand on that a little.
Sure. There are basically three enormous crises that happen one on top of the other. We call it 1980. It's really 6 weeks in 1980 where they just tumble on top of one each other. The first one of those is the drug epidemic. It started, but 1980 is when the money really washes through Miami, and that's when you see that first wave of extraordinary corruption. So the very institutions that you need to lean on during a crisis are about to be undermined. So I'd say the two most important there are Miami's financial institutions and the police department, which get absolutely saturated with cocaine money. Then on top of that, you have the beginning of the Mariel boat lift in early April, where you suddenly have 125,000 Cuban exiles landing in a city that's only 320,000 then. So it's literally like having Providence, Rhode Island dropped on top of Miami. But guess what? You don't have school spots, you don't have any housing, you don't have jobs, you're in an economic recession under Jimmy Carter, inflation's 20%, it's a disaster. And then on top of all of that, you have what were at that point, the New York Times called them the biggest race riots of the century. I'm not sure if that's true when you add up, with more we know, the more we know this year. But certainly the McDuffie riots were huge, and Miami burned for 3 days, and the streets were there was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of misery, and a lot of pain. And these things kept happening one on top of another. So yes, it was a year.
And all in a period of 6 weeks.
Yeah. That really happens in 6 weeks. Now, of course, the cocaine problem continues and morphs. It goes from cocaine money to cocaine bloodshed. And yes, 1980 and 1981 are the two most violent years for cocaine, but obviously that goes through most of the 80s.
And Miami at that time, Miami was not prepared for any of this. I mean, I don't know how any city could have really been prepared for it.
Yeah, I think it's, rather unfair because we were considered, it was an election year, 1980, so everyone's sort of looking at us, and we are literally under the national spotlight. We have more reporters per square inch than anywhere else because bad news is the best news as far as news stations are concerned. But people thought it was our problems. People thought that drugs were just going to be a Miami issue. People thought that race had been a Miami issue, that immigration was a Miami issue. But guess what? They weren't. It was more like, somewhere in the book I called Miami the American Biopsy. Red flags were waving like these problems are coming for all of America. So please don't just say they're South Florida's problems because they're going to go everywhere. And we didn't get a lot of help at a federal level. It came very slowly, a little too late. And basically, Miami had to figure its own way out.
Yeah, I mean, we were basically the launching pad for what was going to become a national problem.
Yeah.
Right. But we were the first sort of dropping out point. And I guess it would be logical that we would be, right, based on our geographics, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, it was geography. We got hit sort of 3 times. At the same time, you can also say geography for how quickly we recovered and the strengths that we developed. And one of the underlying themes in this book is that the mayor at the time, Maurice Ferré, had a very different plan than other city leaders of what Miami should be doing to progress as a city. While every other leader wanted Miami to sort of become a sort of imitation of other American cities, whether it was Atlanta or New York or New Orleans, Maurice Ferré wanted to pivot Miami and have it face south so that it become this sort of bridge between Latin and Caribbean capital and sort of American exports. And that's sort of what he does. And actually, 1980 is one of the first year where that really kicks in, and we make a lot of, it looks like Miami's on fire from the outside, but if you actually look at the numbers of how Miami's done in 1980, we had a pretty good year in many respects in 1980, which seems totally antithetical, but that's what the numbers say.
Yeah, God rest his soul, Maurice Ferré, he was really a visionary, because what he envisioned then is really what Miami has become, an international city that did look to the South and Latin America as sort of the gateway for business and commerce into the United States, right?
Absolutely. That was something he understood, and 1980 really proved that, because we were the American pariah. No one, domestic tourism just fell off a cliff that year.
Right.
Who wants to go to the riot zone? Who wants to go see 125,000 refugees? Who wants to be in the middle of a cocaine gun battle? Nobody, unless you're from Latin America, where everything's relative, right? So, it really, our bumper sticker should have been, hey, it's all relative.
Yeah, in Medellin, they're probably saying, what's the problem? Yeah. I mean, we've dealt with that already.
600 dead, that's nothing.
In 1 year, that's nothing. But the year was, homicide rate went up tremendously. There's some people that say, well, those drug dealers killing other drug dealers, what's the problem here? But it was the seminal sort of, and I don't even know if it was in 1980. I'm not exactly sure, but I do remember the shootout at Dadeland Mall.
Yeah.
And that was that was really opened a lot of people's eyes. Was that the seminal occurrence that really said, the federal government said, we got to solve this problem?
There was also another one just before that. So both of these actually take place in 1979. So, but the answer is yes. So there was one more. There was a shootout in the middle of US 1,
which you detail in the beginning of your book.
Sort of like a machine gun battle on the highway involving police and 2 different gangs shooting at one another. So that got a lot of attention. But of course, you have 1 or 2 incidents, and it's hard to see a pattern. But the pattern really developed strongly by early 1980. But the feds, I have a lot of issues with the federal government in this book for things they didn't do. One thing they did do, which was remarkably quick, was put together a team called Operation Greenback, which consisted of IRS agents and customs agents, and sent them down to Miami to try and figure out what on earth was going on with the cocaine industry. Not because of the bloodshed. They really weren't particularly concerned with the lives of everyday Miamians. They were concerned with the fact that South Florida should have producing a roughly either a deficit or a surplus of $100 million in cash, and instead we had $7 billion of cash floating around down here. And that really tipped the scales. That that rang every alarm bell in the Treasury Department, and that's why they sent Operation Greenback down here to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, and to sort of expand on that, we had banks in this community in 1980 that were open specifically to take drug money, correct?
Yeah, well, I don't know how many were open specifically to take drug money, although they then some of the larger drug operations did try and buy banks outright. But the first time the Treasury looked under the hood in 1980, they found 26 banks, all taking large amounts of drug money.
And they knew they were taking drug money. I mean,
you'd have had to been, yeah. I mean, the hilarious thing, if you read the early congressional hearings, some of these bank executives are, looking congressmen or in the eyes and saying, "I'm pretty sure this money is all from greyhound racing," and you're like, "There's not $7 billion of greyhound racing going on in Florida in 1980. The entire tourism industry in 1980 is $5 billion. So you're not having $7 billion of greyhounds."
And what was and then you mentioned 600 murders in 1980.
Yeah.
Give some perspective to someone watching this show in terms of what it was, let's say a year or two before that.
Traditionally and bizarrely, we're now back at that number. We would get around 120, 130 murders a year. And then you get this slow acceleration towards the end of the 70s, and then boom, catapulted right up to just south of 600 in 1980 and just north in 1981. But guess what? There aren't you're not expanding the homicide department. The homicide department is the same size, and even worse, as I said, the cocaine money had just corrupted the homicide department. So just when you need every homicide detective that you can get, the FBI do an investigation of county homicide in Miami-Dade, and they skin the department so that the poor captain of homicide that year, Marshall Frank, has exactly 2 homicide detectives left. No, 3 with more than 1 year experience.
Gosh.
So, now try and go out and solve 600 homicides.
Right.
And
the laws back in those days, was it harder to bring somebody in and charge them and convict them in those days?
Well, it was just a question of getting swamped. So everyone was swamped, whether you were a judge or a federal prosecutor, a county prosecutor, it just didn't matter. And then the other problem they had was a lot of these murders in 1980 were being committed by Colombians or people off the boat from Mariel, because Mariel, of course, also included only 3%, but that 3%, 125,000, were all Cuban Korea criminals.
Right.
So yes, both of those elements were much harder to track for a police department that, like every other police department in America, had a pretty good idea who the criminals living in their city were.
Right.
Suddenly you've got guys shooting guys, and you've got the wrong names here and the wrong names there. So, so how do you solve those murders? They were really tough murders to solve.
I bet. I mean, because you have new people in the community that you don't even know. I mean, all of a sudden, I guess they would come across this guy, who are you, and figure out this is a hardened criminals out there committing really bad things, bad crimes.
Yeah, and of course they were also committing these crimes. Very few members of the county homicide or city homicide department spoke fluent Spanish, and you're dealing with Cuban on Cuban violence and Colombian on Colombian violence. So that was another something that slowed down the whole.
A little Cuban coffee.
I'm impressed. Yeah, I'll take one.
There we go. Well, that's Denise. She comes in the show every morning with some Cuban coffee. Here, I'm going to pass this one over to Nicholas, and then you can. There you go, sir.
Thank you.
Here's your Cuban coffee. Now, is that Miami or what?
I know. This is how we roll, whether we have a drop of Cuban blood or not.
Exactly. So, okay, so here we were with this sort of influx of the drug coming into the United States through Miami. You had all these people receiving it, distributing it. There were all sorts of crimes being occurred amongst one another. And then it escalated, as you said, in 79 to being occurred in some pretty public places where you don't want to see, like a mall, like Dadeland Mall, or right in the middle of US 1 with machine guns in South Dade. So you have all that occurring. And then, and at the same time, you have this influx, as you said, of 125,000 refugees from Mariel, some of which were hardened criminals, some of which were people with, mental problems, etc. How did that escalate what was already, sort of occurring here in South Florida?
Sure. I mean, it put an enormous amount of pressure on public institutions, and it drove. We had to declare various levels of emergency here. At first, the city and the county tried to do things together and leaned on a huge volunteer force, enormous amount of which came out of the Cuban community. So enormous kudos to them for beginning to take care of their own in 1980. Now, of course, once they realized that this isn't the same sort of boat lift as they got in the 60s, the mood changes even in the Cuban community. And they really feel like Castro has pulled a fast one on Jimmy Carter, which of course he had. And then you get this resentment against the new immigrants from Mariel. And, they've had a really tough time. They've already, to get to America, you've already had to spend somewhere around a month inside an embassy with 10,000 people pressed body to body with people, everyone suffering from diarrhea and God knows what, with 6 bathrooms. Then maybe you've gone home, you've had rocks thrown through your windows by your organized government gangs. Then you've been taken to a little concentration camp by the ocean. Then you've been forced on a boat that's way too crowded, highly risky. Maybe you made it across, maybe you didn't, because some boats didn't make it across. And then when you get to America, if you came late, you suddenly have half the country hates you before you stepped off the boat. So don't get me wrong, from a refugee standpoint, this was a really tough year. But yes, it was also tough from a local government, and the feds come in late. And it's only when you really get the embarrassment of Tent City, where we stashed several hundred people under I-95 for months, that the feds paid up enough money so that we could clear out the lost and place those refugees.
Well, I would imagine that influx of people gave these drug operators who were now smuggling cocaine into the United States through Miami, it gave them a workforce, if you will.
Yeah,
right?
That's something that definitely plays out, not so much in 1980, but definitely beginning in 81 and 82, that it basically lowers the cost of crime in Miami big time. Before that, a lot of the Colombians were flying in other Colombians. You got the expensive plane tickets. You have to put together, your little murder assassination kits, which were kept in the lockers at Miami International Airport. And now instead, you can get a career criminal from Cuba for a tenth of the price.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of the how obviously the Scarface Al Pacino's movie sort of chronicles that as how that occurred. Here's this guy in the movie that's a career criminal in Cuba that comes here and is sort of recruited into the drug trade.
Yeah, there are one or two of them. The fun for me was yes, God knows we've had enough books and films about cocaine, but I was trying to find a slightly different angle for this book, which is why I concentrated sort of on the fancy money launderer, because I think the shock to Miami, the violence is almost an expected shock, but the level of change of what was happening in the money world was the equivalent of traveling, by horse or by airplane. No one had seen the amount of money these guys were making before. You think even a money launderer who's just taking a piece off the top was making somewhere in the region of $40 million a year in a time when the highest paid executive in the Fortune 500 was making 1.6.
Wow.
So, that amount of wealth, and he wasn't the only guy. This money launderer I concentrate on, Greenback calls him one of the dirty dozen. There are 12 other guys making the same amount of money, and there are hundreds making, laundering a lot less.
Wow, it's unbelievable. So you got all this brewing on the one side, the cocaine, the refugee influx, some of these people that came in from Cuba that we probably did not want here, obviously. And then at the same time, you had this racial divide that just kept getting worse and worse and sort of exploded with the case of Arthur McDuffie. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The reason the McDuffie case explodes is because it seems like it's an open and shut case. If you're younger than 50, you've probably never heard of Arthur McDuffie, but he was a black insurance executive, an ex-United States Marine who was coming back from a girlfriend's house.
And didn't want to be late to see his wife.
Yeah. had a little pressure, had slept through the deadline to get back to his wife, and either rolls a stop sign or flashes a finger towards a police officer or pops a wheelie. All three reasons were given by the police later why that chase began. But it's a high-speed chase. It goes on for 8 minutes, which is a really long time for a high-speed chase. By the end of that chase, he has not one but 2 police departments after him, county and city. He finally makes a good decision. He pulls over, and he is beaten into a coma by up to 15 police officers. They then cover up the crime scene, and they make it look as if he's crashed his motorbike. He's carried to hospital in the coma, and he dies 3 days later. There's never any argument that he's killed by policemen, but when it comes to the trial, the question is: can you, as a state prosecutor, figure out who among those 15 struck the killing blow? And that's where the case really begins to fall apart. And it's moved to Tampa, which has even worse reputation than Miami did back in those days of never sending police officers to jail. And sure enough, in May that year, all the police officers are acquitted of absolutely everything, including covering up the murder, which seems particularly puzzling. And
what ensues from that, obviously, is the Black community, which you chronicle in the book. All the communities, whether it's the Hispanic community, the Black community, even within their own communities, they're sort of divided amongst, as the case of the Black community, you had the African Americans that sort of migrated from the Deep South. You had the Jamaicans, the Bahamians, and they were all kind of a little divided, correct?
Yeah, all the communities were kind of a little divided, and they would all look at one another and think of the other communities as kind of monoliths, right? And I think we still do that to a great extent,
yes,
40 years later. But yeah, but the McDuffie case, I would say, was definitely something that brought Black voices together as one. I think one of the huge differences when you compare, unrest in 2020 versus unrest in 1980. Back in 1980, there were very few Black public voices who had a national stage to speak, while in 2020, every voice speaking was a Black voice. And I think the community in 1980 felt unheard, certainly in the halls of justice. And McDuffie wasn't the first case that year. I think there'd been 5 separate cases of outrageous police conduct against Black citizens, whether it was the molestation by a police officer who was a 12-year-old Black girl, or a police officer who shoots a guy through the back of the head for urinating against a warehouse wall. These things had been going on all year, and Janet Reno, state attorney back then, hadn't taken any of them to trial. So when McDuffie goes to trial, the thought is, well, this one's a slam dunk. And of course, it wasn't. And that's why as soon as you get that verdict, which comes down on the Saturday afternoon, never a good idea, because everyone's out of work and everyone's out of school. And, within an hour, the first murder on the streets has occurred. And that goes on for 2 to 3 days.
Yeah. And that, I think I told you this when we did the radio show together several months ago, but at the time I was a student at the University of Florida, and I had friends from New York who I developed a friendship at Florida my first year there. And I told them, hey, you know what, let's go down for the weekend to Miami. It's a great place. I would love for you to see it. We could stay at my folks' house. I brought, 3 guys down with me. We were out partying and whatever in Coconut Grove on that Saturday evening. And we decided to go from Monty Trainer's in the Grove down to a place in the south part of the county. And we were going to drive down Grand Avenue, which I often did. I never had a problem going down Grand Avenue, and the street was closed and police were saying no. And you could look down the street and see fires you could see fire and everything. When we, the next day, drove back to Gainesville, on Sunday afternoon, driving through 95, my folks lived near the Brickell area of Miami. Driving north on 95, all you could see were buildings on fire, because it smoldered for some time.
Yeah.
So talk about the devastation that occurred in that aftermath.
Yeah, well, one reason it was so bad was because the violence was so bad that the fire department were prohibited by the county and city commissioners from attending fires, because they were shot at during that opening night. So basically, anything that then caught fire for the next 2 days was allowed to burn, including the Norton Tire Company, which led to those huge plumes of black smoke that everyone remembers. It was economic devastation, but it fell within Overtown and Liberty City, and to some extent the Black Grove. And if you drive around those very neighborhoods of Overtown and Liberty City today, they've really never recovered from those riots, because what you then got was the efforts to rebuild were knocked down at a state level. Bob Graham, our governor back then, tried to push through $300 million in aid, and that was knocked down by Tallahassee because it was seen as rewarding rioters. So then they tried to do it on a more local efforts. But the problem was, as an insurer, are you really going to go in and insure in a neighborhood that's just burnt itself down? And as a white business owner, are you really going to go back into a neighborhood that was targeting white business owners? So that was another reason. It wasn't all, it's easy to say, the neighborhood never recovered, but there were rational decisions, that are baked into the pie of why those neighborhoods never recovered.
Yeah, I mean, if your business had been burnt down during those riots, I assume you wouldn't have been too eager to rebuild your business there.
Yeah, and to be honest, Miami was the riot capital of America for the whole decade. We had, I think, one of the riots is fairly small, but I think we can account for 5 full-fledged riots in that decade. So we lead. It's not until LA takes over in '92 that we hand that crown over.
Yeah, it was horrific. Yeah, we had a series of riots. It wasn't just the McDuffie, but the Black community, and I don't want to sound like a raging liberal here, but the Black community was sort of, in many areas, many places in the United States, it wasn't, I guess, indigenous to Miami, but they were really torn apart. I mean, the case in point, the expansion of I-95 destroyed Overtown.
Yeah.
Which was a very historic area in Miami.
Yeah, no, but I would say they were indigenous to Miami because during the foundation of Miami, if you look at the signatures of that document, they actually got all the Bahamian railroad workers to sign because they needed a quorum. So I think about a third of those original signatures are actually Black signatures.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And that's where, and sort of 95 is one of the areas where they're told to build. So of course that's where they start building for the first decades, and that's, Overtown definitely had its issues in the 40s and 50s. It had very little sanitation compared to Liberty City and things like that. But yeah, there was no one big enough in the Black community or had enough power in those days who could defend that community from having the highway built straight through the heart of Overtown.
Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning of the show, in starting to read your book, immediately I'm thinking, wow, this would be a riveting movie or TV series, and a convergence of things occurring. You said in a 6-week period, right?
Yeah.
The convergence of these things occurring, which would be, in some cases, I mean, you look at Mariel, you look at the McDuffie riots. I mean, these are things that happen maybe once in a lifetime in a city, if that.
Yeah.
And happening all within 6 weeks. How was law enforcement, how was Janet Reno as our state attorney at that time? I mean, was it something they just were not going to be able to conquer without the support of the federal government?
Yeah, to a great extent. Yeah, they knew they were getting overwhelmed, and even Jimmy Carter figured it out. There was a particularly humiliating visit for Jimmy Carter in early June, when the boat lift was still going on, but it had to some extent begun to slow down a little bit. The riots had just happened. The cocaine stuff was now obvious, and he comes down and he meets with all the great and the good of Miami in Liberty City. And instead of coming up with a federal plan to help Miami, he just said, listen, I'm not here to say anything. I'm just here to listen to you people. And that was it. That was the message. And there was, it was such an empty message that when he then steps out of that community center back into the limo to go to the airport, he's pelted with beer bottles.
Really?
And this was from the Black community, who he had said was going to be his secret weapon in the election that November.
Yeah.
So it didn't bode very well for Carter. Even as early as June, you got the feeling that he was being swept downriver by events. And certainly from a federal perspective, they were way too late in coming to save Miami. But in some ways, Miami figured it out sort of on the trot, and even as early as spring '81, you've got the mayor. He has this extraordinary invitation which he issues to press all around the world. Come and see the real Miami. We're going to show you everything. Now, of course, if you say come and see the beaches, you probably get editors going, what's he covering up?
Right.
But when you say come see the scenes of cocaine violence, come meet the refugees and come see the riot zones, guess what? People actually showed up. And it's also the start. You can nail it. It's the start of that Miami could sell not only its beauty, but also its danger. And I think that's something that then leads directly to things like Miami Vice.
It's funny you say that, because my sister's lived in California since the 70s, mid 70s. And I remember during these years, she had friends in California, and I would go visit her, and friends would say, oh, I want to go visit Miami. I mean, you think I'll see a drug deal going down or a murder on the street or something? Yeah. It was sort of an attraction to people coming in those days in an odd, perverse sort of way, right?
Yeah, I don't know why, but we've always been a bit like that down here. People like just a little bit of danger somewhere.
Yes.
Right. Preferably not in their own backyards, but maybe one neighborhood north or south.
Yeah, don't let it happen in my backyard. Have it somewhere.
I don't want it in Coral Gables. Right. If you want to do that on the beach, that's okay.
Exactly. So tell me about, the book is riveting. A lot of the stuff you put in here were based on interviews. You weren't living in Miami in 1980, were you?
No. I was still back in my native town of London. I moved full time to Miami 8 years ago. It's based on an enormous amount of interviews. I got to track down people like Maurice Ferré, the mayor, long before he died. Amazing reporters at the Herald like Edna Buchanan and Carl Hyson. A lot of old retired homicide detectives. So I had a fascinating time, because I spent 2 years doing the interviews, another 2 years going through a lot of papers. Unfortunately, 1980, the Miami Herald has not been digitized, neither is 1981.
Right.
So if you want to go and do that, you've got to pretend you're in 1950 and sit in front of a microfilm for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, or in my case, well over a year. It's just this endless supply of documents, and then going up to sort of government archives in Atlanta and things like that, tracking things down. But if you want to get it right, you got to do the legwork.
Does it ever get, when you're writing a book like this, I'm really curious about, do you ever get to the point where you're like, you know what? Enough, I can't do this anymore. Enough. I've looked through a year worth of microfilms. I've talked to 800 different people. Man, I just can't do this anymore. Do you ever get to that point where you're like, I got to give it up?
Well, I try not to. Everyone knows the sort of Ron Chernow quote. If you're a writer, he has this quote, which is, what is it? It's like, leave no page unturned, right? So you always want to get to that one last, what happens if that gem you're looking for is on the last page? You've got to do it. I think the good news is the person who feels like you just described is normally your editor. So when you had, this book, when I handed it in, was much closer to 500 pages. Now it's a very slim, I think it's 285 or something.
Right.
So it's much more manageable. But she went through it with, a sharp sword or a red pen or whatever you want to say, and turned it into something much, much sleeker.
Is that as an author, is that a fight? Is that a battle usually with that editor?
Well, it's my 8th book. So, I've used to think it was very unusual, and then I realized it was happening to all my books, so I presume it happens to everyone. Sometimes it happens more to some books than others, but that's part of the trade.
It just goes with the territory. So one day you're sitting at home, Nicholas Griffin, and what happens? It's just the phone rings and they say, hey, we want to option your book for a film project or a TV project. Is that how it kind of works? Or do you go out shopping it around, saying to people, presenting it to people, saying, hey, I think it would make a great movie?
Yeah, agents are always shopping your book around, but guess what? Everyone's agent is shopping everyone's book around.
Right.
So what happened in our case is we were very lucky that on the day the book came out, we got this glowing review in the New York Times, which is obviously much more digestible and easy to read for the other end, for the producers. So when a producer reads a rave review and it sounds kind of maybe slightly sexy because it's Miami in 1980, then the phone starts ringing, and we got a lot of offers, which was great. But the reason we went with Mitch is I live in Miami, Mitch lives in Miami, and we both care about the final product a lot because we're going to be the ones sitting at dinner when someone goes, "How could you let them
do that
to
right
your book?
Right.
Are you crazy?" So I think,
so was your experience meeting Mitch through that process?
No,
you had met him.
I had met Mitch. I'd written a book actually that came out maybe the day I came down to live permanently in Miami, and Mitch had been very kind, helping me with that book. And I did my book launch at Books and Books, and we became friends then, and we've been pals ever since. So
what are the next steps? I am I'm drooling, literally waiting to watch this on Netflix or Prime or somewhere like that at HBO, wherever. I'm literally drooling, and you're right. It's got all these sexy elements. When I started reading it, the first couple chapters that I just started reading last night, I thought to myself, it's got all the sexiness of what would make a great series. You got drugs, you got violence, you got intrigue, you got sun and fun and sand and Miami and all this stuff in it that just makes the elements are just perfect for a series of this nature. What are the next steps?
Well, the showrunner is basically the key person in any television series, so it's really all up to him. He's gathered these writers. They've done their job already of handing him enormous quantities of where they think their characters should be going. He now has to sort of knit it all together. He has to write, and he has to write the pilot. And at that point, we go out and we have conversations with the HBOs and the Netflixes, and we hope we get greenlit. And at that point, it's either a green light or you get taken out the back and shot in the head. So
right.
We'll probably know, I would guess, by the summer, we'll know our fate.
So by the summer, we will. Shot in the head is a good, I guess, analogy for a book like this. So we'll see how that sort of pans out. Do you feel like so by the summer you think we'll know?
Yeah, I would think one way or the other we'll know by the summer.
Well, that should be interesting.
But what I would really like is if not only do we get greenlit, that we get greenlit to shoot this in Miami, which I think would be amazing for the city. It would be a lot of fun too.
Is it in the process of doing that? Maybe you don't know. Is trying to elicit the participation of, let's say, a noted director or a well-known leading star. Is that help sell a project through sometimes?
Yeah, that would be part of the next step as well.
But
we've already got what they call in the business an A+ showrunner, so that's the best thing you can have at this point. So yeah, I mean, we're in good hands.
Great. Well, I'm sure you are with Mitch and his group. The projects they're doing are just incredible right now, and I'm sure, and this should be really, really at the top of the list. The Year of Dangerous Days, Riots, Refugees, and Cocaine in Miami, 1980. Stuff that some people don't necessarily want to remember, but we're not going to be able to forget it pretty soon, especially when it comes to HBO or some sort of a platform for a great what is meant to be a great series. Before we finish, working on anything now? Any project we can see from Nicholas Griffin in the near future?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to write another Miami book. The issue is whether or not my publisher will risk doing another Miami book. We'll see. There's a lot of movement and mergers going on in publishing. Simon & Schuster, my publisher, was just taken over by Penguin Random House. So basically, there are a lot less places to take your book ideas out to now.
Right.
So I'm hoping I'll get another Miami book greenlit and can continue digging into the history of the city, because it's a really short history, but there's not a year that goes by without something insane happening.
Man, it's really a crazy place here. You're right. Yeah. Our history is so short, but it so moves fast in South Florida. I mean, it's ever changing down here. And maybe that's part of the reason why we love it in Miami and in South Florida so much.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I'll be a lifer.
Well, you better be, because you're a treasure for our community. We need more and more people like you, Nicholas Griffin, here in South Florida. Thanks so much for joining us today at Miami Community News. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, again, You don't want to, if you get a chance, A Year of Dangerous Days, Riots, Refugees, and Cocaine in Miami, 1980, a must read, and soon maybe a must watch on a digital platform somewhere or a network somewhere. Looking forward to that. You can get this book at Books and Books in many places, bookstores throughout South Florida, Amazon, and so forth online. Again, Nicholas, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for joining me here at Miami Community News, the hub for local news and information. Great treasures in our community like this guy over here to my left. We got to keep them around. Thanks for joining us today here on the Andy Korge Show, and we'll see you again tomorrow with another great show. Have an awesome, awesome day. Thanks for joining us.